Carlotta has been out for a couple of days now, and since I've had the chance to properly test her out more extensively, I thought I'd deliver my more fleshed out thoughts on the character, evaluate whether my pre-release pros and cons were accurate or not, and give my opinion on where I think she currently stands in the meta. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Okay, to start things off, I talked about how this esteemed lady of the Montelli family would be the absolute best Glacio DPS in the game upon release. I mean, yeah, obviously. If you'll indulge me for a moment, wouldn't you be so kind as to have a look at the pre-existing Glacio DPS roster? I'm going to filter out all of the bad DPSs now. Oh, look at that. We practically had 0 Glacio DPSs before. So yes, Carlotta is the new best Glacio DPS, but that really isn't saying much when the height of her competition is freaking Ling Yang. This title will become more prestigious as time goes on if she ends up being better than all future Glacio damage dealers to come. With that being said, if you're somebody who cares about collecting all DPSs of each elemental type and Wuthering Waves, then Carlotta surely won't disappoint as the game's first limited 5-star Glacio DPS. I mentioned how, based on the short gameplay that Kuro had shown off to us, it seemed like Carlotta was going to be amazing against boss targets due to her single target nature. Dare I say that I made the bold claim that this fine Mafia lady had the potential to become Wuthering Wave's newest best single target DPS in the entire game. So, did that end up coming to fruition? In my opinion, yes. Absolutely. This feisty lady is 100% the best single target damage dealer out of the entire character roster, no questions asked. For starters, the huge blasts of damage that she deals against single large enemies is not to be undersold, because holy waterhorse, in the name of the great imperator above, she eats away at boss HP bars like they're bars of chocolate. To say that her performance against boss enemies is good would be an understatement. No other DPS that's currently in the game is able to compete with her boss clearing abilities, aside from perhaps the almighty magistrate of Jinzhou, Jinshi. And because we didn't previously have any competitive Glacio DPSs before, keyword, competitive, there are no bosses in the Tower of Adversity that currently have Glacio res, so at the moment, she can effectively open fire on any large foe that we currently have in the game. That's only a temporary pro in fairness. However, the fact that there are currently no bosses in Wuthering Waves which count to her still remains. Do note that Lampy Lumen Myriad and Sentry Construct do have Glacio res, but they haven't appeared in TOA yet. I also mentioned how Carlotta's amazing mobility and range would lend her to being a fantastic to play unit, not to mention how this actually goes hand in hand with the last pro that I mentioned regarding her boss killing abilities. Essentially, because she's able to move around and lock onto targets so easily, previously irritating bosses such as the Thundering Mephis would be far easier to tackle. Does this hold true? Yep. If you absolutely hated that boss before, then try Carlotta up against him. It'll be the most cathartic bullying session that you'll ever experience for sure. Her ult targets enemies so easily, and she's able to do her damage from super duper far away. This makes her adaptable into literally any boss fight scenario, and considering that TOA's hardest challenges tend to be boss fights, yeah, I'd say that's pretty relevant. I honestly think that she's one of the most intuitive, user-friendly DPSs to play in all of Wuthering Waves. Once you figure out her basic mechanics and rotation, it's so easy to take advantage of the splendid range and ease of use that she boasts. This isn't even mentioning her mobility, which only furthers her position as the finest boss-killing machine in all of rinascita. The Montellis really are something, huh? Certainly not a group of people that you want to cross, because then they'll send Carlotta running after you. Get it? Because she's mobile? Anyways. Her extreme mobility makes it super easy to chase after enemies and dodge attacks. Plus, if a boss is charging up a crazy one-shot move, then you can dodge such attacks very easily with her. Truly, a greatly skilled executioner. I'd also like to highlight how this truly does make her the complete antithesis to Camellia, which is something that I theorized before based on the presented gameplay that we saw. One is a super mobile DPS that can easily adapt to insane attacks coming her way, the other is an individual who is quite literally glued in place during a majority of a rotation. Perhaps this is just me, and this is a very subjective statement, but I personally think that Carlotta plays a lot more smoothly than Camellia. Obviously that's up to personal taste more than anything else, but I find that the incredibly flexible movement and range of the fancy Mafia lady makes her a far more comfortable pick in a variety of situations. Case in point, very movement-heavy boss situations. So yes, this unit plays every bit as well as I initially thought she would based on the initial snippets and teasers, which is something that I'm delighted to say, as I would say her fun factor is on the same level as Chang-Li's to me, which, for the record, the Phoenix lady has my favorite playstyle in the entire game, so that's a hefty achievement weighing on her shoulders, though once again, that is merely subjective. Another positive point that I made in regards to everybody's favorite massacrer of Montelli enemies was that her weapon options would be pretty varied. This is relevant because main DPS characters in Wuthering Waves are oftentimes so biased towards their signature weapons to the point where they feel significantly worse on 4-star options. There are a few exceptions, such as Camellia having the Somme Noir Anchor, but for most limited 5-star DPS units, this is unfortunately not the case. Did this end up being true? Honestly, only somewhat. It's true that Static Mist, despite not really providing anything specific for Carlotta, is a perfectly fine substitute 5-star weapon if you don't have her signature, and considering how this game heavily encourages gear swapping, I'm sure there's plenty of you who either chose Static Mist for free from your standard 5-star weapon box selector way back when, or you may have pulled it off of the standard banner, and the new rinascita craftable gun suits her kit perfectly well, considering that she actively applies debuffs on enemies thanks to having them present in her kit. However, it's not like the upgrade of getting her main dedicated weapon is any less large than it is for any other limited 5-star DPS character. So, Carlotta isn't necessarily special in this regard. 4-star gun options are decent, but they're not insane to the point where they come anywhere near the level of her signature. I would say that it's the same as the status quo, really. We'll clear well on a 4-star weapon, but the 5-star will be an undeniable upgrade. I would also like to add that since she's such a powerful DPS, especially in boss-based situations, she'll still feel very impactful even on a cheaper option. Even so, Last Dance is still a super significant boost to her, such as the result of fantastic weapon sharing systems and a great weapon banner. However, the good news is that if you pull for Last Dance, then you're basically sorted in terms of 5-star guns, because remember, she's the first limited 5-star gun DPS, so her weapon carries splendid value in general. There were some potential drawbacks that I mentioned in regards to this esteemed young lady as well, so let's evaluate the validity of those statements. I mentioned how this character would be tied to Vasily Painter, as she's the absolute best Glacio and skill buffer in all of Wuthering Waves. Alternative options would most likely turn out to be mid. Yep, that holds true. It's undeniable how much good Zhezhi offers to Carlotta's teams. Dare I say that she practically transforms the performance of the team. If you're wondering whether you should pick up Zhezhi or Last Dance first, Vasily Painter, that goofy little artist, comes first any day. Lumi and Tao Chi are absolute jokes when compared to Zhezhi's performance here. It honestly feels like Carlotta was designed around her. That's how meaty this synergy feels. There's no way of beating around the bush here. There has been a development in my stance regarding this though. Previously, I stated that Sanhua was going to be your best free-to-play bet if you didn't have or want the Silly Painter. She has a couple of generic buffs that apply to any DPS through means such as 5-piece Moonlight Clouds in her S6, while also boasting a stupidly fast Concerto rotation. She's a broken unit in general, you get the idea. However, I don't want to overshadow our dear sweet Yang Yang. She'll be your prime free-to-play friendly Carlotta choice if you're willing to indulge in pulling for Zhezhi. She will be a little harder to learn and use, but you get quite a few neat things out of your practice in return. She can pass energy over to Carlotta via her outro skill, which is super neat considering that her ult is the main meat of her kit. Her field time is low, which as Sanhua has proven time and time again, is a major benefit. She's capable of doing a little bit of sub DPS, she can hold 5-piece Moonlight Clouds, and she's capable of providing the main DPS of the comp with 20% extra attack upon casting her special plunge. She can also provide some grouping, which aids with a little something that I'll touch on in a moment. So this cutie patootie has a whole lot going for her. If you happen to be a fan of her while also having zero interest in Zhezhi, then she's well worth your time. I would like to emphasize that Carlotta will still feel infinitely better with a Silly Painter by her side. However, it's nice that there's another competent free-to-play option available to her, seeing as Sanhua is already such a highly contested unit, being wanted by other very high-profile characters. Hey, it's me, Juice, while I'm editing this. I almost forgot to mention Chang Li. How could I? She's literally one of my favorite characters. So there's been this Chang Li Carlotta team that's been popping up around the place recently. It's really neat. It's not that Chang Li really does anything specific for her, it's just a really decent team with a really solid rotation that does a pretty good amount of damage. So if you're not really a Zhezhi fan, but you absolutely love the Phoenix Lady, then she's a really neat substitute option. Two main flaws with it, one being that it's kind of hard to play, but that's mostly because Chang Li teams in general require a higher skill level from the player. And secondly, Carlotta isn't able to swap out during her ult state, so during that period of time you're not able to do any Chang Li quick swap stuff. However, that is far from a deal breaker, it's a pretty decent team, give it a spin if you're a fellow Chang Li lover. Remember when I said that we touch on a little something soon? We're at that stage now. I mentioned how this gorgeous magenta mafia lady was gonna feel a bit rough in AoE scenarios. Did this end up holding true? While yes, she's much better in single target based scenarios, I actually don't think this was nearly as bad as I thought it was gonna be. To be honest, you should be pitting her against boss chambers in the TOI anyway thanks to your high damage and excellent playability in single target scenarios, but her blasts can actually hit more than one enemy at a time if there are a couple of them standing close together. This won't be relevant in endgame content, because there, you're able to choose who you want to fight which specific chambers, but in the overworld, it's not nearly as uncomfortable as you might have thought. If for whatever reason you really want to force the AoE Carlotta agenda, you can always use her trusted free-to-play friendly partner in crime, Yang Yang. This is where her grouping kicks in, because her getting the enemies close together will allow the Mafia Lady to gun them all down at once. In TOA, this really is less intuitive than simply playing her against boss enemies as intended, but if for whatever reason you want to force it, you can, and it isn't nearly as clunky as I originally imagined it would be, which I'm super stoked about. And now the moment that everybody's been waiting for. Where do I currently think that Carlotta stands in the meta? Honestly, I 100% believe her to be one of Wuthering Wave's latest and greatest. An S-tier DPS that is excellent at her more specialized role, while still not being too restrictive whatsoever. A fantastic way to start off Rinascita's patch cycle for sure, while also delivering on being the first limited 5-star gun plus Glacio DPS. I genuinely think that she's worth the pull if you need a strong new DPS unit to clear content with, and she will most definitely be an upgrade over any previous boss-killing team setups that you used. Even on more cope builds, I've been super impressed with her damage output. And oh, don't even get me started on how I feel about her performance when you get onto the higher end of investment. A perfect character in my opinion that manages to feel totally busted and balanced at the same time. Kuro did fantastic work on this unit. She's my new favorite character in all of Wuthering Waves, both in terms of her kit and enjoying her as a character. She's beautiful, cunning, smug, British, smoking, and everything in between. There's nothing that I dislike about this character. To me, she's like the Kafka of Wuthering Waves, and I've been maining Kafka ever since day one of her release in Honkai Star Rail. Compare her Resonator showcase of Kafka's trailer and you'll get what I mean. Perfect unit. Here's hoping that Kuro can keep cooking up delightful characters as delightful as my beloved feisty Carlotta. Definitely let me know about what you think of her down below in the comments. Did she meet your expectations? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ2nd channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. Hopefully this video was able to tell you my more developed opinions on Carlotta now that she's been out for a while. This has been Juice, signing out, and remember that praising the Imperator's name a day keeps the Montelli Executioner away.